Since the invention of things like Netflix and Hulu and even DVR, our access to movies and television shows is virtually at our fingertips. I have a friend, and her name is Katie, and she lives and breathes for television shows like Vampire Diaries, and it's gotten to the point where she feels like she is somehow a part of this world of vampires and werewolves and love triangles. Now, I'm not here to say that Katie thinks vampires and werewolves are real. She's very much aware that this television series is fiction. However, there are those hardcore fanatics out there whose everyday lives are influenced by TV shows and/or movies. Professor George Gerbner was the dean of the Annenberg School of Communications at the University of Pennsylvania. In the 1960s, television was a fairly new invention, and George wanted to study whether or not television could heavily influence viewers' ideas of what the everyday world is like. And this was the birth of cultivation theory. The textbook definition of this theory is that television shapes concepts of social reality, and I think movies can also fall into this theory as well. Think about it this way. Let's look at someone who watches the news 24/7. As most of us may know, about 90% of what's reported on the news has to do with death, corruptions, war, economic problems, or any other topics that make you lose your faith in humanity. And George Gerbner believes that if you're exposed to this type of television heavily, you'll start to believe that the world and the people in it are far worse than they actually are. This theory also suggests that television and media possess a small but really significant influence on the attitudes and beliefs of society. And it doesn't necessarily influence behavior. A different example could be something like this. So, since the beginning of time, women have been seen as subordinate to men, and their goal in life is to try to find a man to take care of them. And we all know this guy named Walt Disney. He has made his way into our hearts since we were little twiglets. And every few years, there's a new Disney princess movie that comes out, and most of the time, the story goes something like this. So in the beginning, there's usually a female character that has her own personal angst that keeps her from being happy. And most of the time, their families are pretty dysfunctional. And wouldn't you know it, a strong, handsome guy comes along, usually knowing very little about this female character. And in a very, very short period of time, the two run off together, they get married, and they live happily ever after. Female Disney princess fanatics look at this storyline and begin to apply it to their own lives. This is where cultivation theory comes into play. Watching these types of movies tends to induce a general mindset of romantic relationships and how they're supposed to play out. Again, this idea wasn't created by Walt Disney. He just enhanced the cultural values that have been present since the beginning of time. And it's starting to seem that more and more young girls have Disney-level expectations. Their social reality is manipulated by these Disney storylines. Thankfully, there are Disney movies like Frozen, and this movie broke away from the cliche storyline and proved that you can be a hot mess, you can be awkward, and you don't need no man to be happy. Of course, there are critiques of Gerbner's cultivation theory, as there are to most things, and Gerbner recognized his theory's downfall. But the point of this theory was to recognize the media and the overall effect it can have on someone's perspective.